215th BlockTalks. We speak with Griffin Dunaif, co-founder and CEO of Halliday, who discusses the factors that will crack the UX frontier in crypto. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is Blockdrops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody, I'm here with Griffin Dunaif, who's going to tell us who he is and what he does with blockchain. Griffin, welcome to BlockTalks.
Thank you for having me. I'm Griffin. I'm the founder and CEO of Halliday, a blockchain company that was founded in 2022. You can think of us as the plaid for crypto. We connect to Web 2, Web 2.5, and Web 3 rails and offer a unified checkout experience and API. And we do this on top of a novel workflow protocol that I can sort of happy to dive into and explore. And then a little bit about me. So prior to my tenure as an entrepreneur, I studied systems and cryptography at Stanford. I initially went in through operating systems, embedded operating systems, and then fell in love with cryptography and the intersection of the two, which is blockchain, distributed systems, cryptography, and a little bit of behavioral economics. But it was mainly focused on computer science during my time there.
And what triggered your interest? Some of the people that I've had on the show, they come like you from academic background. That's where they found blockchain. Some people were working in financial services and got enamored by the new money or the new gold with Bitcoin, and then went on to work directly with crypto. What was your trigger point that gave you the insight on like, maybe I should be working on this?
Yeah, there were three discrete events that led me to really believe in the technology and its transformative effects broadly. And I think one of the interesting things about crypto is it's not just a technology, it's also a sort of set of values and beliefs, right? It's about dispersing power back to the edges of a network, and that sort of historical lens and governance lens was really interesting to me. But one of the first events, which is actually, it's a bit, maybe I'll say it's a bit whimsical, but I think it was quite interesting to witness, was when Ariana Grande did a performance in Fortnite. I remember I saw that one summer when I was doing research, and my first reaction, and I played a lot of video games growing up, is like, what is a superstar doing in Fortnite, in a video game? And, if you talk to anybody who's got, middle schoolers, people are now buying virtual assets and skins, and they care more about their skins in Fortnite than they did, about shoes or the things that, we would buy when I was in middle school. And so there's this broad societal trend towards virtual spaces. And so that was one. I was like, okay, I believe in this trajectory towards virtual spaces are becoming social spaces. We're going to concerts, and now it's Marshmello. You got Travis Scott and everybody else doing concerts in these virtual worlds. The second thing was actually, there was an ancient history class that I took, and they did this case study of an island early on in humanity's development, where they sort of tracked the production of the society over time. And there was this rapid increase, and it happened to correspond with the development of the written law. So they had like a stone in the middle of the town where they would write down who owed who what. And it was like their very early contract law. And that was incredibly important to their ability to coordinate and produce things. And I think when you see it from the genesis of a society, it's much more clear that those sort of legal institutions are really important, versus nowadays where things are so complex and, we have thousands of years of legal evolution. And then the last thing was when I took the blockchain class at Stanford, and the professor, Dan Bonnet, he chose a transaction on Ethereum mainnet. And it happened to be from a video game at the time called Axie Infinity. And the coolest thing about Axie was that there were these institutions called guilds that raised hundreds of millions of dollars to buy and rent out virtual land. So it was like this combination of, we're doing concerts in virtual worlds, the institutions of the law are very important, and now we're starting to see real economic activity happen in these virtual worlds. I saw that and I was like, okay, I have to do something now. And so that sort of Axie moment got me into blockchain proper.
Very interesting story in terms of the trigger points, and I really enjoy that it came from this realization. And you got caught in the metaverse in a sense, right? Because that's kind of the age of the metaverse in Web3, which lasted, I don't know, 18 months and brought a lot of people into the space, but ultimately also fizzled because there was just not enough flywheel, I believe, right? And it kind of fizzled. But from that particular stance or stage in your understanding of blockchain, how do you then become the person who builds into the space? Did you find a problem that bothered you a lot? Was this a UX thing that you kind of got annoyed? What was the kind of the seed from the impetus to build what we're building with Holiday?
You're exactly correct. It was a user experience motivation. I got really into these blockchain games, and we've since become just a general purpose API and payments business. But our initial trigger point for exploring blockchain was the difficulty around acquiring your first NFT. Actually, it's expensive. Maybe you need credit to buy it. None of the traditional financial infrastructure existed for NFTs and gaming. And you've experienced this. Onboarding to these new blockchain games was very, very challenging. And so we started to build a company around that thesis of how do we build economic infrastructure for these games? Because these games are inherently economic because they're on blockchains. And it turns out that when we were starting to sell into these games, a lot of them were on their own blockchains, which is we were very early to the app chain proliferation. We realized that we're spending 99% of our time building all of this complicated orchestration infrastructure. Like we try to do a basic payment on a new chain. We're like, oh my God, you need a bridge, you need a swap, you need gas, you need, if you run out of gas, you need to re-up your wallet. There's all these different flows that for somebody who's not a PhD in blockchain, it can take you 45 minutes. It can take you in an hour and a half. You got to download a Chrome extension. You got to go to a centralized exchange. You got to get both the gas and the asset. It's so many things that, look, people don't want to. I'm the kind of person where if I see a credit card box and not Apple Pay, I'm not buying it. Like we've gotten so conditioned to these really, really excellent user experiences that crypto it's just in a different galaxy when it comes to drop-off rates and conversion rates.
So what prompted you then to go fix it? How did you go from being a researcher interested in the technology, annoyed by a problem that specific technology actually created, to building to actually complement that and create this better experience?
I just built protocols in my free time. I was fortunate to work with people too when I was at Stanford who shared that passion. And there was a certain point where we were working on these problems and building these protocols where the time required to build a real production-ready protocol was eating too much into school. And we were fortunate that it generated investor interest back in 2022. And I made the decision to leave the program and start the business. So I ended up dropping out of my studies to go full time and try to build the protocol.
And how's that been? What have been your, say, earlier successes, and maybe let me into the challenges as well?
It's hard to build a blockchain protocol for many reasons. I think the industry is inherently very multidisciplinary, more so than what you would expect at like an AI SaaS business. And one reason I say that is blockchains, you're moving assets around. This is regulated industry. So you need to be aware of regulation, compliance, state level regulations, federal regulations, different country regulations. That's not something that most, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, unless you're like really deep in fintech, have to deal with. Then you have to understand cryptography and protocols and this totally new development paradigm. Then you also need to do the hard software engineering and business development and sales. So immediately, you're trying to manage a complex ship, which I didn't fully recognize until I just dove right into it. So it was certainly harder than what I expected. And we also raised our seed round. Money hit the bank a day before Terra Luna exploded, and that was followed by FTX. So then it was just deep bear market for the next 18 months. And so you're also struggling to find customers, and you're iterating towards product market fit. So it took us a little bit of time to find the right instantiation of what we wanted to do. And actually, a client who was really important to that journey was actually DeFi Kingdoms, who was one of the first important clients for us, and they've been a close partner of ours ever since.
How do you build? What's your process to get, other than the original vision, which you're obviously pursuing? How do you iterate? What's a day in life building the business in which you're now trying to, if I got this right, you're trying to be embedded everywhere and make it a better experience for everyone around crypto?
Exactly. We want to do all of that payment plumbing for you. So we don't want you to have to go out and build multi-chain orchestration, connect to a bunch of global fiat on and off ramps, connect to a million different centralized exchanges. We're trying to do that fundamental work for you. One of the things that's really important to us is that we are committed to the long-term vision of blockchain. Not building a custodial technology, we're building a decentralized smart contract protocol. So that's one thing that we never compromise on. The second thing that we're very passionate about is customer first. So it's like you balance customer first with the long-term vision of the company, and we relentlessly optimize against those two. But we'll never compromise on protocol first, smart contract first.
What are the challenges in balancing that? Because sometimes there is a pull from the market, sometimes there is just innovation that you have to adopt because then you're going to get left behind if you don't. So how do you kind of balance those two things? Because the resources are obviously limited. So how do you balance them within that context?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you have to, especially in an industry like blockchain that is early, R&D is essential. Like you actually need to do a little bit of science. Like I think one of the things that's very challenging about how blockchains have evolved is, we've gone from one monolithic chain to there being hundreds, if not thousands, of blockchains. Smart contracts, that paradigm of development, is not at all meant for that universe. And it's amazing because any app that tries to build multi-chain, you'll recognize a pattern. They spend 99% of their time building fundamental infrastructure, not building their product. This is like, everybody's like, where are all the apps? There are no apps because nobody can build them. It's so hard. It's like, imagine everybody's building AWS over and over and over again. And so you need to have the fundamentals to build these novel distributed systems. And part of that is like in a young industry, in a technical industry, you need the R&D folks. You need the people that come in with those innovations that will empower everybody else to move faster. The analogy I always like to give is, prior to the general purpose CPU, everybody was building ASICs. And the way it worked is, if you wanted to build a calculator, you'd tape out a chip, go through the vertical process, go out and produce it. And then if you wanted to change your algorithm, you're building an entirely new piece of hardware. And that changed with the Intel 4004 and x86 and the reprogrammable microprocessor, or the programmable microprocessor, which kind of invented the personal computing software industry. And we never went back. None of us remember the ASIC businesses that were competing with Intel. And so I think that such an innovation is critical for smart contract programming. And that's the sort of work that got me excited. And for somebody with my background, that the sort of work that excites me, having read, the ARM instruction set, all these original innovations that we take for granted these days, but somebody has to sit down and just do the R&D. So that's part of it. Just do the R&D, have the people and have the discipline to do the R&D. And then the second part is just, you got to be obsessed with the customer. And remember that the customer pays the bills. The customer is part of the mission. They're betting on you and the technology in this early stage. And so it's really about committing to R&D. Don't play fast and loose, don't cut corners, and also service the customer.
I like that view because we've grown accustomed with Web 2, especially social media, the move fast, break things ethos. That does not work in crypto because when you break things in crypto, you wreck people's life savings. You can wreck entire microeconomies, and that is very irresponsible of crypto to do. Granted, permissionlessness brings the best and the worst out of people. This is the world we chose to live in, but there is such a thing as responsible innovation. So I really like the angle of respecting that of that aspect. Now, looking more towards the industry, we're kind of living in the stablecoin summer. We're entering the fall or the autumn in the northern hemisphere. Maybe it will continue to be the stablecoin summer regardless of the season. Um, how has that impacted the business in general? Or even more specifically, have you found new challenges or even new opportunities that you were able to capture as these things settled because the regulatory landscape changed, the regulators all of a sudden became aware of what a blockchain is and decided that this is reasonable for them to help frame. So how did that play out for you?
It's been hugely impactful across a few different vectors. I mean, first and foremost is the Genius Act. And I can't understate the importance of that. For the US federal government to embrace this technology is opening a door that this is the sort of validation you need to go from fringe to mainstream. You can't fight the mainstream barrier here. If you want this to be a global technology, you need buy-in from governments. You need buy-ins from the governments that are setting these policies, and in particular, it's important to get buy-in from the U.S. federal government. And this unlocks big tech. This unlocks Wall Street. This unlocks all the other regulated businesses where most of people's money are, and sort of rightfully so. It's good to be store your funds in places that are secure and regulated. And this is a pathway for crypto to reach audiences that it has not reached before, and to work with businesses and global enterprises that have been inaccessible to crypto. And that's been very important for our business as we grow this market and bring on people who weren't previously crypto users. The second thing is, a lot of the use cases for stablecoins are not necessarily consumer facing. They're B2B payments or cross-border settlement and treasury management. But one of the interesting side effects of that is in getting those plumbing rails really good, or those pipes really good for those B2B use cases, all the consumer technology companies can also plug into those rails to offer better services. And an example of this is every app has a lot of pain with global deposits and withdrawals. If you're a crypto fintech and you want your users to spend their first dollar on your app, the question is, how do you do that? How do I onboard? Do I go from a credit card? Do I go from my bank? What if I'm in Europe versus New York City versus California versus Latin America? It's a really complicated thing. And to have the local banks who are already there start issuing digital assets is going to unlock a whole new universe of opportunities. And so it's just a macro tailwind that's going to sort of raise every boat in this industry for that on and off ramping rail to get really good, and it is getting really good, which is really exciting.
Now, this also is a counterpoint to the original ethos of the cypherpunks who created Bitcoin, because that's a byproduct of the cypherpunk culture, which is disintermediation. Everything we're seeing as positive and emergent, as validation or coming of age of crypto, is the acceptance of mainstream through intermediaries, not through self sovereignty. It is self custodial in a variety of cases, not always, but most of these stablecoin protocols are centralized. because you can build centralized businesses on top of decentralized infrastructure, but you can't build decentralized business on top of centralized infrastructure. So what we're seeing as we evolve is this kind of technology being co-opted not for the paradigm it represents, but for the technology opportunity it represents. And therefore, it doesn't accrue value at the edges. It really concentrates values to specific intermediaries. Don't get me wrong. I love the guys at Circle. I have friends there. MakerDAO, same thing, or Sky. Um, but there are ways to do the same thing in a decentralized fashion while allowing value to accrue at the edges. Um, what do you think of this? Are we being, and I don't want to be controversial, but are we being co opted by the status quo because they're interested in the tech that we are building on the back of another ethos? And would that lead us to another global financial crisis because it's the same appetite, different technology?
It is different than the original Bitcoin vision. Sort of proof of work, Nakamoto consensus. I will say though, I think it's a bit more. It's a combination of things. I won't say it's like fully in one direction or the other. Where stable coins, many stable coins do represent ultimately a tokenization of fiat, right? And fiat is a centralized, government issued asset. But one way to think about this too is I'll use like a cloud analogy. For most of the internet, right? A lot of businesses ran or run or still do run their servers on prem, and then the cloud came around, and hugely innovative. A lot of new businesses are now running exclusively on the cloud, including Halliday. Right? We don't run any of our infrastructure on prem, but it's still amazing, even with the ascendance of the cloud, and I think the cloud is certainly the future. I think it's still over half of businesses are still on prem because you live in this hybrid world, right? It's hard to ask every on prem business to instantly move to the cloud, right? So you have all these tools that stitch together on prem and cloud and make it a more elegant solution, and you're going to have both exist at the same time. That's the way I think about crypto, where most people hold their money in a bank account for historical reasons. If you're banked, or you hold cash. And not everybody's going to move those funds day one. And so you need to make it easy to take those funds and represent it on chain. And maybe a whole new generation will store a lot of money in self-custody wallets first. And so you're going to have this sort of hybrid universe, I think, for the foreseeable future, where it's fiat, it's crypto, it's exchanges, and they need to all interact really nicely. And then once that happens, that's sort of the gateway to more and more crypto functionality. So I think the main thing is we have to build apps and experiences that can continue to like attract usage on chain. It's like you don't get AI without the cloud. So that's why we're going to use the cloud, right? It's not like you can't just say, hey, we got cloud and on-prem. You should switch on-prem to cloud for no benefit. Like you have to see the benefit of programmable money. And I think there is that benefit, but it'll take time. And so I think it's necessary to do stable coins. But also I should mention too, the Clarity Act, which is the second piece of legislation, is writing into law protections for truly decentralized technology. And I can't emphasize how important that is. They're writing into law a different classification for something that is truly decentralized. So they're actually protecting decentralized technology. Because one of the pain points of working in blockchain is there are a lot of technologies that claim to be decentralized, but are not. And that's where you get into, there's like this reverse issue where it's harder to build self-custody. It's easy to misrepresent something that's custodial as self-custodial. And so that's another role where proactive and informative regulation can actually really help that original mission. But it's going to be nuanced, right? It's not going to be all the way to sort of, one direction or the other.
Yeah, but for that to be clear, it has to be also obvious. It can be nuanced, but some basic stuff needs to be really obvious. Otherwise, we'll fall into the space you just described, which I call it Dino, which is decentralization in name only. Right? It's just decentralization theater. I think Balaji says this is decentralization theater, and I think that's kind of where we need to be careful because these are centralized governors or legislators. They don't live decentralization. Actually, they live the opposite, which is very curious because they are central governments in most cases. So it is a very interesting. And if you told me 10 years ago I would be excited about progression on regulation, I would have laughed out of my chair, because who would have thought that this would be you know builders spending more time with lawyers than with actual engineers. So it's a funny time to be in the industry, to be frank. um, in terms of industry, now that we're talking about it, what is the one thing you believe that we need to fix now to avoid working another 15 years and then realizing we didn't fix that one thing and now we're back to square one? What's that one thing in your mind, and why is it?
I actually strongly believe it is decentralization in name only, and I think that there's actually a huge risk at this current point, and it's actually one of those things where I think it's also been market driven because none of the stuff has been regulated yet. There's a simple fact, which is it is 10 times harder to build an immutable smart contract based protocol than a custodial solution. And what's happened is a lot of people will sort of obfuscate the custodial reality and go to market quickly. And there's risks that if custodial solutions reach network economies, that it sort of becomes like social medias where you can't undo this sort of compounded growth. And we see that in many places in blockchain, right, where there's some things that have a level of performance that, as a computer scientist, I'm like, that's not, but you can't do that on a blockchain. And so I think we really need to recommit to, I don't think decentralization is a spectrum. I think it's binary. It is either decentralized or it is not. You either have control or you do not. It's not, I sort of have control. No. Like you either have no control and it's self-custody, or you do have control. And, there's sort of like the questions of like, how do you actually do that? I mean, there's the cultural values of blockchain that can help. I think Ethereum has a lot of legitimacy and is a leader in this sense. But I still think it's hard. The people who are building decentralized, they have to win, or you've recreated the same technologies but with a different name.
I like that. I don't consider myself a maxi of any kind because I think maxis have a hard time reevaluating their own principles and ideas and not evolving. But I'm heavily into decentralization. Um, I I might disagree with the binarism of your argument because I'm also old and time passes and things progress. But I do believe in a decentralized. The problem in building in the decentralized space is everything is adversarial. In building for adversarial environments, it's really damn hard, and not everyone is prepared to face that. You can't trust anything. How do you build for that reality where nothing can be trusted? Only math can be trusted. So this is I think, um, and again back to the earlier point on mainstream adoption, everything moving so fast, a lot of money pouring in, blah 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 blah. Obviously, people want to solve problems and end up in the theater, as Balaji would say. Um, Now it's also an industry that lives 24/7, 365. We crazy FOMO everywhere. How do you keep yourself centered, healthy, both physically, mentally? Do you have any recipes? Have you folded under the pressure? What's your current regimen that keeps you, productive and without dying out of anxiety?
I certainly don't live a balanced life. Like I actually truly, I love work and I love protocols. I think part of it is staying focused on the fundamentals. I think there's a lot of noise, and this goes for any industry. I mean, AI is the same way. Crypto is the same way. I think whenever there's too much, and that happens, right? Like, oh, there's 5 things are changing day over day. I try to go back to my history, sort of doing research and being in school, because I think one of the things I really appreciated about being in a university and being there with professors is they're very fact based. They reason through things. They don't feel the same FOMO, and I think having that mindset, yeah, I guess company X, Y, and Z can make crazy claims, but if you sit down, you go through step 1, 2, and 3, and you try to analyze the actual structure. Building anything new and innovative is hard. And so, yeah, I take a lot of what I see on Twitter with a very heavy grain of salt. That I like to joke that there's a lot of slideware and not a lot of software being built. You got to see it. I want to see it ship. When there's a crazy claim, like, let's see it ship in production. Then we can talk. And look, and it's another thing, just personally, is having a wonderful partner and good friends, and knowing how to unplug when you need to unplug.
Yeah. Listening to the friends like, hey, we need to go out for a walk. We need to go out for dinner. Just drop the mouse and go touch some grass.
Exactly. Like, remember that reality still exists.
It's really important. Do you have any non-crypto friends?
I do. Yeah, no, I have friends who are interested in a variety of things.
Do you get the random call when Bitcoin hits all-time high? I'm like, hey, I'm now interested. How do I get on with the program? How do you onboard these people to crypto? These people in your life into crypto?
I've honestly seen it personally through people who've had difficulty with cross-border money movement, and this is like one of the canonical use cases, but it's a real thing. I've got a good number of friends who are international students who, whenever they try to move money to the United States, it's insane. They can't use Venmo, and so when you want to pay them for dinner, you're doing 6-dimensional math to get money to them, and so that's a real immediate use case that's really fun and really important. And then I think people have seen the success of tokenizing new assets, and people are talking about tokenized stocks and like perpetuals and those sort of interesting instruments that are starting to gain traction, and Robinhood launching a chain. But don't often get the like Bitcoins hit all-time high. I will say the way I've experienced that is it's funny. It's like the enrollment in a lot of the blockchain classes is very heavily correlated with the price of Bitcoin. Which is kind of funny.
Yeah, well, it's funny, and it's funny that people who are probably not investors, professional investors, or engineers or computer scientists, chooses a headline to make a move and not education to make a move. To me, that's very curious, and but yeah, it's I think real world use cases are the best to bring people on board, hands on. Like, yes, it solves your problem. Clunky a little bit, yeah, but it does solve your problem. So just get on with it. So yeah, listen, we're getting down to the final bits and bobs of our chat. Really love the chat. How can folks who are listening learn more about you, what you're building, where you're going to be next, listen to your musings on, say, Twitter? What's the path there to get to know more about you and what you do?
We have a Twitter. It's Halliday HQ, HALLIDAY, capital H, capital Q on Twitter. And I'm there too, posting things and updating people on what we're doing. And then, I'm the kind of person too, we like to let the product speak for itself. We power the entire checkout experience for Story Protocol. So their chain, their layer 1 blockchain. If you want to buy IP token, if you go to the Story website, that's Halliday, and you can see the value. My hope is that if you go there, that you can check out a token with a user experience that feels like is alien to crypto. It should feel like a Web2 e-commerce checkout. And that's really what we've been trying to pioneer and take to market. And so if you're a builder and you need something like that in your app, please do reach out to me. And then if you're at the conferences this year, we'll be there.
Super. Griffin, thank you so much, man. And yeah, hopefully we'll bump into each other in a crypto conference somewhere around the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockDropsPodcast, on Twitter at BlockDropsPod or 0x Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, and you can listen to the Blockdrops podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbun Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Shout out to Griffin for such an incredible journey from researcher into builder. And don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check out the merch store, blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.